All right, as you're making your way back in, we're getting ready for our next amazing speaker. Very proud of this gentleman and the work that the organization does, standing up for freedom, freedom from religion nationwide. Always makes me chuckle when a news article comes out and they say, a group from Wisconsin, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's their members that are doing it. The group from Wisconsin is just supporting their members. So if you're not a member of this group, Freedom from Religion Foundation, join up. They are fighting for your freedom from religion. Now, with that said, that is Dan Barker, co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. He is well known for his book, Godless, and his new one coming out, Life-Driven Purpose. And what's the subtitle? Living a Purpose-Filled Life. And that is on sale at Dan's table. After he gets done here, he'll be happy to get that for you. And I want to welcome him as a very prominent member of the atheist community, Dan Barker.
One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. Okay. So who would have thought Southern Missouri, of all places? One of our council members, board members of the Freedom from Religion Foundation is from St. Louis. And Annie Laurie Gaylor, my wife, she and her mother started the foundation back in the 1970s. And her dad was from Southern Missouri, Paul Gaylor. He went to Methodist Church in Southern Missouri. And he was one of those kids that was a born skeptic. Annie Laurie, his daughter, my wife, she's a third-generation atheist. But Paul Gaylor, he was like 8 years old or 10 years old. He was in church at a Methodist church here in Southern Missouri. And it dawned on him. He was sitting in church looking at all these Missourian believers. And he looked around the church and then he said, "My parents are nuts." He was one of those kids who never believed. It never took, like James Randi. James Randi was like that. It just never stuck, right? Some of you are like that, right? You went to church and you wondered, what the heck? And these people, you know, if it was a play or a drama, you could say, okay, right. But these people are actually believing it. However, on the other side of the bell curve, there's people like me. I went to church and I loved it and I believed it and I got goosebumps and I talked to Jesus and God was my Savior. And I got tears when I sang the hymns. So some of you were like that, right? Were some of you like that? You believed it all and you felt it all and it was like real to you. So why is there such a difference? Why was Paul Gaylor here in Southern Missouri? Why was he just this naturally born skeptic? No one told him to start doubting. No one told him, hey, this is, you know, he's just on his own, right? I really admire that. And those of you that are raised without religion or had no religious, I really admire that. You didn't have to crawl out of any deep holes, at least for religion goes. And Paul was like that, and others of us are on the other side. And you know, my story, which I tell in the book Godless, where I've spent 19 years preaching and loving every minute of it, standing in the pulpit. There's just something exciting about, I knew that I was called of God to be on the front line of the army of Jesus, and I was going to bring souls into the kingdom. And I was that guy on campus. You know that guy on campus who's got the Bible under his arm and he comes up? There's always a couple of them. Overly confident. I knew what I knew, and I loved it, but I loved this Lord and all that. And you didn't know it, but you were secretly starving for this message that I had. And as soon as you talked with me and you looked in my eyes and you felt the Spirit of God, you would feel like, wow, those Christians have something special. They really do. They're really tapped into something really transcendent and special. And this low natural sphere that we're living in is nothing compared to the glories of the spiritual world. All of that. In the foreword to my book, Godless, Richard Dawkins writes, Dan Barker was not just a preacher. He's the kind of preacher you would not want to sit next to on a bus. And he's absolutely right. That was just, and it felt great. You know, I felt like what I was doing was positive, you know. You didn't know it, you blind skeptics leading these empty lives, meaningless lives. You didn't know it, but it was your lucky day when God directed you to sit next to me on that bus. That was, you know, it was not an accident. It was not coincidence. The Bible says all things work together for good, right? So I loved it. I knew it. I felt it. I preached it. And there were a lot of people who said yes after hearing my ministry. There are still some people in the ministry today. Mark Griff was one of them. He was a young teenager who said he wanted to go into ministry, and his parents said, don't go into the ministry. But I said, don't listen to your parents, listen to God. He's an Assembly of God minister today because I encouraged him to become a preacher. Boy, you should have seen how he responded to me, though, after he got my letter of deconversion that I sent out in 1983. You can read that story in my book, Godless, where I tell why I changed my mind, what happened, what my whole life was like. And as a result, I've met other ministers and clergy who've gone through the same process. Maybe some of you were Sunday school teachers, like my mom was. And so now some of you have probably heard about the Clergy Project, which Daniel Dennett and Linda Lascola and Richard Dawkins and Elizabeth Cornwell and I sort of started, and then it grew in 2011. There's now almost 650 members of it. So, and some are here, right? Are there a couple, is Neil here? No, he's not. He probably just left. He didn't want to hear me talk. He's tired of a preacher, probably. But it's to help. Originally, we wanted to call it Save a Preacher, which was kind of cute. In fact, I think Dawkins said, let's call it Save a Preacher. But Clergy Project now is going and to help clergy who are in the pulpit get out and to do some honest work in their lives. So for me, I wish there had been something like that for me back in 1983 when I left. It was just me and my thoughts. And I became a brand new atheist all on my own without ever having knowingly met another atheist. Of course, you meet atheists and agnostics all the time. But how do you know it? Right? I used to preach that atheists were fools and empty. So you would think that if you met an atheist, you should immediately spot them, right? You should be able to see the empty lives they have. But it's because I think most of them keep their heads down. They just don't let it be known. So in 1983, I became an atheist, and in 84, I sent out my letter of deconversion to the world. And you can read that letter in the book Godless. And then a few months later, about 9 months later, I got a call from the producer of a talk show with Oprah Winfrey as the host. And you can see that show. Have any of you seen it online? Where it's the day. Not only was that the very first time that I publicly spoke about my atheism after having been a preacher, because what do preachers do when they leave the ministry? What do? What pulpit do they have now? Who do they get to talk to? They just sort of, you know, find another job if they're lucky. Not only was that the first time that I had publicly spoken before any audience about my atheism, it was a live TV audience as well. And it was also the first time I had knowingly met any other atheists. I'd known about them since then. I thought I was the only one kind of when I came out of it. This was way before the internet, where you could just type in atheist and find out how many of your neighbors don't believe. And I wasn't so nervous about being on TV. That was actually kind of fun, because I'd been on Christian television a lot, like in Southern California, the Praise the Lord show in Spanish. But that was also the very first time I had spoken before a hostile audience. And I got to tell you, it's fun talking to you guys. This is really wonderful. But it's not as much fun as talking before an audience that hates you. I got to tell you, it is a blast. For the first couple of minutes, I was kind of nervous, and then the audience started like, have you seen the show? They started like yelling at us. They were calling Annie Laurie a witch, you know, and they were like, and then I just got, this is great, and I just love that. So I love doing debates in churches. This is just, it's because like you're saying, there's a differential there. You're saying something, you're not just preaching to the choir, but you're saying just things that they have maybe never heard before or never thought about, and you can make a difference. So I'm not saying you should all do that. Maybe maybe once a preacher, always a preacher. Some of us are just like that. I don't know. We can't help speaking out. But also, that was the day that I met Annie Laurie Gaylor. And 3 years later, we got married. And now we're co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So we have a videotape of the day we met, which is really cool. We didn't know it, you know. And there's a place in there, if you watch it, there's a place where I'm talking and you can see Annie Laurie going kind of... I don't know what that meant, but you can see it on this. And we showed that to our daughter, Sabrina, a couple of years ago. And Sabrina was laughing because we looked so young and I had all this hair. And there was all the 80s music and the 80s style and all that stuff. And then the audience. Oprah had packed that audience with... you know, all these Bible thumper types. It was actually really good TV. She'd got all these Bible believers trying to get back and forth. So and has anything changed since then? It's still kind of the same battles we're fighting and the same ignorance. But that was kind of a beginning of a new life of ministry, if I can use that word, which was for me exciting because I didn't change. When I left the ministry and I walked out of the pulpit, I didn't change. I went into the pulpit because I wanted to know what was true and speak what was true. And that's why I left the pulpit. So now I get to talk about that. And I think this is a compliment. Richard Dawkins, in that foreword to my book, Godless, said, Dan Barker is the most eloquent witness of internal delusion that I know. Because I was deluded. I really, truly, honestly believed it. I wasn't faking it. I had this religious experiences and the goosebumps and the prayer and the answers to prayer and all that stuff. And I loved it. I didn't hate it. A lot of times Christians try to say, what went wrong? Was there some bitterness? Or more often they try to say, oh, what moral issue were you struggling with? Did you have some secret sin in your life that you didn't want to give up because you didn't want there to be a God to keep you from doing this sinful, immoral thing, right? They think if they can find some little thing, it rarely has to do with the intellectual. It has to do with more your personal choices in life. So anyway, it's been a blast. We became co-presidents in 2004 after Ann Gaylor, the principal founder, Ann Gaylor, Annie Laurie's mother, retired. She died last month. She died in June. Kind of unexpected, but not totally unexpected. And you may have seen the obituary in the New York Times about her. She was cited by the Wisconsin Assembly. She was also cited by the U.S. Assembly, Representative Mark Buchan. She was internationally known for her work, not just with state church separation, but also with women's rights and feminism and abortion rights and all of that. She started what is now the longest running abortion rights charity in the country, the Women's Medical Fund. Who says atheists don't do good things, right? She's helped more than 20,000 women. She helped more than 20,000 women poor women mainly, to pay for abortions. And a great work, and she was highly criticized. You can imagine in a kind of Catholic state of Wisconsin. I've done a lot of debates, and I got to debate Dinesh D'Souza. I shouldn't say I got to. Dinesh D'Souza and I, you know who he is, that right wing? We've done 8 debates in as many states, and we won't do any more. If he invited me again, I wouldn't agree to it, because his star has really dropped, you know, for a lot of reasons. The least of which being convicted of electioneering or campaign fraud. And his hypocritical divorce. I actually met the young woman. She showed up. He brought his assistant to one of our debates. Can you believe it? He brought his assistant. They only needed one room. And when the assistant showed up, she didn't look like an assistant. She was his... and I kind of blew it. I said, so are you Dinesh's daughter? And he said, she's my fiance. Well, nobody knew that. He was still married, you know. He was anyway. And that's a totally different story. But he called me once. He said, Dan, let's do a debate about abortion in Cleveland. And I said, I don't want to do a debate about abortion. I'll debate, does God exist, or can you be good without God, or is Christianity a great moral force, whatever. But abortion, he said, well, there's this Right to Life Cleveland. There's having a big event, and they want they want to have a debate, you and me to have a debate on the issue of abortion and religion. And it's on a Saturday night. And I said, I don't think I want to spend a whole weekend going to some Cleveland Right to Life group to debate abortion. There's better things to do. And he says, well, I'll split the pay with you. And I said, you get paid for this? Because I never charge. We just do it. I never charge. And he said, well, they're going to give me $5,000. And besides, I told them you would. So I talked it over with Annie Laurie, and we both agreed that that's not the kind of debate I would want to do or that FFRF would want to do. But she agreed with me, go ahead and do it. So I went to Cleveland for this. It was really weird. I mean, I like talking to hostile audiences, but that was like another notch. Not just believers, but all the regional, anti-abortion, so-called pro-life people were there, and the evangelicals and the nuns, and they were wearing these "What would Jesus do?" stickers. And I got up during the debate and I said, Jesus never said a thing about abortion. He never said a thing about an unwanted pregnancy. So if you Christians want to do what Jesus did, keep your mouth shut about abortion. So it was an okay debate. It was fun, but I went home and I took the check for $2,500 and I signed it over to the Women's Medical Fund. And that was kind of delicious. The Cleveland Right to Life helped about 10 poor women pay for abortions. So debates are a blast. But I'm going to talk about my new book here. Often during debates, and this has probably happened to you too, you talk about all these intellectual issues, right? You've talked about first cause. You talked about design arguments, teleological, and you talked about moral arguments, and you talk about history, and we talk about philosophy, and we talk about all these issues, right? We're talking away. Often, when those are kind of done with, they will turn around and say, but if there's no God, what's the meaning of life? And I suppose we're supposed to say, oh, I better start believing now. Because I want some meaning of life. Well, I better, wow, I never thought of that. Wow, how could we be so dumb? But the meaning of life and the purpose of life comes out a lot. And I'm sure most of you know about Rick Warren's book, The Purpose-Driven Life. My brother Tom is the one member of our family who did not deconvert to become an atheist. My brother Daryl did, and so did my mom and dad, which is really cool. I never thought, it's usually the other way around. I never thought my mom and dad, my dad was a seminary-educated lay preacher, and my mom was a Sunday school teacher in the Assembly of God. They both became atheists, and so did Daryl, and there's 3 boys, and so did I. And Mom once told the reporter, he came to her house in Apache Junction, Arizona, to interview her, and she said, you know what, it's great being an atheist now because I don't have to hate anymore. She said, I think I'm going to make like a sticker about that. My Patsy Barker. I don't have to hate anymore. That's pretty cool. I don't have to decide who's in and who's out. Who's the inside? Who do we like these people or don't we? Or what about gays and what about? We can all just be human beings and we can all just accept each other for who we are. That was a great thing for her to say. But my brother Tom is still a born-again Christian. He's a great guy. He's a retired high school principal. He lives in Riverside, California. And I went to see him last fall. Unfortunately, his marriage is falling apart for various reasons. I went to his apartment. And have you ever gone to somebody's house and you walk in and you're not quite sure why, but there's something wrong about it? Everything looks right. You go in and you look, everything looks perfect. And he's very clean and it's a very nice apartment. But there was not a single book in the whole place. Doesn't that make you feel weird when you go into someone's home, there's nothing to pick up and read? Well, there were 2 books. Right above the TV, there's the Bible and The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. Those 2 books are in my brother Tom's house. And I'm not dissing him as a person. He's a great guy. And we decided we love each other as brothers and let's put aside our differences. In fact, he's helping us because there is this stalker that we might have to get a restraining order from who's harassing FFRF and me personally and my family personally. He's also putting up pictures of my grandkids and my brother's grandkids online. We're not going to kill them, but we're going to make them wish they were dead. I mean, this is a horrible, horrible guy. And so we're getting ready with a restraining order. And my brother Tom, to his credit, says, I'm not an atheist, but I sure hate that. So he's going to help us with legal action against this Christian who's trying to harass. He's doing a lot more things, but. And Tom and I know we disagree, but we also know we're a family. We love each other. We have the same memories and same history, and why waste our precious time together talking about stuff that divides us? So, oh, is that 30? This is like a debate, right? It's a time, but they time keep it a debate, right? Yes. Okay. Oh, okay. Never mind. I actually feel more important when they're putting up the time things. Just like, wow. Oh, really? In 10 minutes? Okay, good. So, anyway, so Tom and Dad and Daryl, you know, we kind of have this agreement. Let's not talk about this stuff a lot. But a couple of years ago, Tom sent my dad a copy of The Purpose-Driven Life. My dad, who's now a strong atheist. In fact, he's turning 90 this month. I'm going to go see him up pretty soon. And my dad looked at a couple pages and he said, and he just put it down. And so I got to thinking, well, what's the power of this book? So I read The Purpose. Have any of you read it? Good. It's just, it's nothing more than newly packaged, old-fashioned biblical fundamentalism. That's all it is. And Rick Warren became famous selling this, you know, self-help, where it's him that's being helped. It's not the people. But, and you know, he's so famous, he got to do the inaugural prayer at Obama's first inauguration. Remember that? So he's like this big, he sold, I don't know how many, 40 million books of this. And it's just 40 days of purpose. Rick Warren starts out his book, The Purpose-Driven Life, with a short sentence. It says, it's not about you. So guess what's the first sentence of my new book? When it comes to purpose, it is about you. Rick Warren's book, don't read it unless you want to give some money to an evangelical. Basically, do you know why you were put on this planet? It's not about you. You were put here for some higher purpose, above, beyond, to direct your life. And a lot of people are gullible. When I used to talk to people on the bus, why are you here? What's the meaning of life? What's the purpose of your life? Do you know what why, you know, do you know what your future is going to be? How do you know right from wrong? An awful lot of people, perhaps on this side of the bell curve of human variety, want and need someone to tell them from above, like a parent figure, here's what your life is. So according to Rick Warren, I'll save you the trouble reading the book. You were put on this planet. The purpose of your life is to know God, to glorify God, to fellowship with other believers in glorifying God, and to get other people to come with you to church. That's it. That's why you were placed on this planet. This whole scheme of creation and the universe and the stars and the planet and all of that was for you to do that. That's why you were placed on this planet. How many of you want to sign up to that purpose, right? There's usually one in every crowd that raises their hand. But I think it's totally upside down. And that's why I took purpose-driven life and flipped it this way and made it life-driven purpose. Instead of viewing the world like I used to from a top-down mentality, there's an authority up there, a parent figure, or a military commander, or a monarch, or somebody, some big sovereign thing up there that is now dispensing your orders. Like when I was a Christian, we were part of the body of Christ, and we would hope to die someday, and God would tell us, well done, my good and faithful servant. You did the job that you were supposed to do. Your marching orders, you know. So that's the mentality of most religions. It's a top-down way of looking at the world. In fact, most countries were formed that way too. Most countries and constitutions were based on some sovereign authority. But in the United States, what did we do? We took that top-down model and we did this. Who's the sovereign authority in our country? We the people, right? Our president is called Mr., right? There's no class, there's no higher authority. There's no, although if you're a clergy person, you think you are at a higher level. And the IRS, by the way, gives you special breaks if you're a member of the clergy, which is one of our lawsuits that we're filing over. But it's an upside-down thing. So Ulysses Press, which published Godless, I approached them about doing a book called Life-Driven Purpose. They got cold feet. They took the manuscript and they said, we don't want to have a book called Life-Driven Purpose because Rick Warren might sue us. They got scared. And in fact, if you see the book which came out from that, it was called The Good Atheist. I have some copies there. The Good Atheist is a good book, but it's not the book I wanted. They took the whole thing out, they took the chapters out, and they just put them aside, and they came out with The Good Atheist, which is the good accomplishments of atheists in the world. So Pitchstone Press last year said, we'll take a stab at it, but we're not afraid of getting sued by Rick Warren. In fact, if you look at the back of The Good Atheist, the publisher put a little disclaimer on there. Like their attorneys told them they should do that in case Rick Warren wants to sue us for using life-driven purpose. And do you know that purpose-driven life, Rick Warren has actually trademarked the title. What author trademarks the title of their book? Well, he did. So no one can use that as a book title. You can take anyone else's book title in the world and use it for your own book. Did you know that? You can't copyright a book title or a song title. Otherwise, there'd only be one song called I Love You, right? I mean, there's how many thousands of songs. But Rick Warren has trademarked it, and so the publisher was kind of scared. And with good reason. Rick Warren came to our attention back in the late 1990s when there was a lawsuit. There's a provision in the IRS code that says clergy in the United States don't have to count their housing as income. Did you know that? It's section 107. In fact, that's one of our lawsuits that we're challenging. And so, wouldn't you like to do that every year? Wouldn't you like to take your taxes, all your rent or all your housing, just say, nope, that wasn't even income. It would drastically lower your liability and you pay a lot less taxes. So, Rick Warren in the 1990s got his church to declare his entire salary as a housing allowance. The whole thing. He paid 0 taxes. And the IRS didn't like that. The IRS said, wait a minute, this is stretching, this is cheating. And so the IRS made a determination that Rick Warren was cheating the taxpayers. And they assessed him penalties and back payments. Rick Warren sued the IRS. It's called Warren versus the Tax Commission. He sued the IRS saying, but the code 107 doesn't specify an amount. Can you think of anything more sleazy, right? It didn't say exactly, you know. But he probably in good conscience was arguing, since the IRS code didn't specify an amount of the housing allowance, I could declare whatever I wanted. But clearly he was declaring a housing allowance, money that he wasn't spending on housing, right? It wasn't all housing allowance. So he was cheating us taxpayers. Congress stepped in and got Rick Warren off the hook. They reworded the phrase in paragraph 107 to say that from now on, the housing allowance is limited to fair rental value of your home. So from now on, ministers still get it, but it's limited to the fair rental value. And in cases of some of these big megachurch pastors, what's the fair rental value of the home these mansions these people live in? Plus, a lot of these churches ordain 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 pastors, and Pat Robertson was even ordaining their janitors, you know, so that they could take advantage of this. Anyway, we heard about Rick Warren. Rick Warren has a congregation that might have a purpose-driven life, but their leader has a loophole-driven life, basically. He was cheating, and he knew it, and he got away with it. So the publisher was kind of afraid, well, he's the kind of guy who's going to sue. Well, so Pitchstone Press, who came out with Life-Driven Purpose, my new book, their attitude was, and Kurt there is a great, they're a young, really up-and-coming, medium-sized publisher now. His attitude was, bring it on. Can you imagine the publicity? I mean, it'd be like a dream. Please, Rick Warren, sue us, please. Wouldn't that be a great thing for a book, right? To get, it's probably not going to happen. Maybe he's a little smarter than he was 20 years ago. But so, life-driven purpose turns everything upside down and views the world instead of top-down, where there's a master up there that we are submitting to. And even Islam, the word Islam means submission. This whole religious mentality is that we are nothing and you are everything. And all you have to do is look at people when they're praying. What are the postures of prayer? The postures of prayer are identical to the postures of slavery. There's a master who's large and big and you are small, and you kneel down and you show you're no threat, and you go down and what is this? You're shackled. Your wrists are shackled together. I'm no threat to you, O big master. And what is one thing that a master fears more than anything? A slave revolt, right? Because what if all the slaves did revolt, right? You want them to be submissive, and you want them to be like sheep. You want them to be quiet. So even Paul in the Bible proudly boasted, I am a slave of Christ. The Greek word is doulos, which means absolutely nothing. I just like to say that to show, that... Have you ever heard sermons where the minister's preaching and then they say, by the way, in the Greek or in the Hebrew? They just want to show you that they know some Greek and Hebrew. So, but now you know, the word is doulos, and that means, Paul was a doulos of Christ. So, Rick Warren's got it all upside down and all backwards. It's kind of like looking through the world through some binoculars, but you've got them pointed the wrong way. The same tool. And it might go a long way toward explaining why it's so hard for some of us to talk with some believers. Have you ever had a conversation where you think you're having a conversation, but you wonder, well, how come it's not translated? How come it's not? Well, it's because they're viewing the world this way, and you're viewing the world this way. You're looking at the same set of facts, but you're looking at through the other side of the binoculars. So I make a point in Life-Driven Purpose of trying to uncover that bias. One of my chapters is called Religious Colorblindness, where I try to explain how I used to think. I was the eloquent spokesperson of internal delusion. I know what it's like to be deluded. And it's powerful. And the believer listening to you, skeptic, coming back, is not going to be hearing what you think that believer is hearing. They're going to be seeing it totally different. And I try to explain why that happens and how maybe we can find an end run around that. So I think when I was a preacher, I used to have the good news of the gospel. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. I think we atheists have the truly good news, better news, best news in the world, better, higher than any of that stuff, of being submissive slaves before some master who has the power to punish us with eternal hell or whatever you consider that punishment to be. And in Life-Driven Purpose, I explain exactly, in one brief sentence, what is the best news that we atheists do offer to the world. And it's going to sound wrong. And it's going to sound counterintuitive. But it's really great news. The news is this. There is no purpose of life. And that is great news. Because if there were a purpose of life, we would be beneath it. If there were a purpose of life, we would be members of that army or parts of that machine or whatever. We would be fitting into some big plan up there, top-down model. Life is its own reward. If there's a God, what's the purpose of his life? Does God sit up in heaven going, why am I here? Why is there a God instead of no God? Where do I get my morals from? If there's a God, doesn't he just get to be and be whatever it or he or she is? So why do we think that we don't get to be? Instead of this top-down, in Life-Driven Purpose, I make the argument that it's actually better to be bottom-up because the bottom is the real world that we live in, the natural world. We're natural animals. And so thinking that there's a purpose of life actually cheapens life. But if life is its own reward, if there's no purpose of life, then we are free then to have our own, to find or create our own purpose. Now, to say there's no purpose of life is not to say there's no purpose in life. And that one preposition makes a huge difference, of versus in. I remember Kai Nielsen wrote a book back in the early 90s, Ethics Without God, in which he made that point. There's no meaning of life, but there's plenty of meaning in life. And purpose, whatever purpose is, it's natural. Purpose is striving for a goal. You're either trying to get something you want or avoid something you don't want. Purpose is why the branches of a tree are reaching to the river. Why does it do that? There's a need or a goal or something you're trying to attain or something you're trying to keep away from. So as long as there's problems in life, and there's going to be plenty of problems and challenges, as long as there are problems to meet, then there's purpose in life. We non-believers, we atheists, by saying there's no purpose of life, actually enhance the purpose in life. Who would dare say that someone like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, an atheist, by the way, and her friend Susan B. Anthony, who was an agnostic Unitarian, who would dare say Elizabeth Cady Stanton did not have a purpose-filled life in those 50 years she worked for this crazy idea that women should participate in their own democracy? Can you imagine that? It's been less than a century. Less than a century ago, women could not vote for their own leaders. Isn't that amazing? It's going to be a big celebration in 2020, huh? When that, wow. But 2020 vision. So people like that who've lived immense lives, non-believers, and yet lives of immense purpose, trying to solve problems. So if you want purpose in your life, usually you don't have to find it. It usually finds you. It could be something like one of your siblings or one of your relatives dies of some rare disease, and you say, I'm going to fight that disease. That wasn't planned in the Big Bang. That wasn't like some purpose of your life, but you're choosing it. You're deciding to fight this problem and meet this challenge. It could be, well, you could make a long list of your own. It could be hunger, thirst, predation, natural disasters, shelter. It can be, what else? War, illness, fighting illness. Or the challenges could be the challenges of gaining knowledge through science or creating beauty through art. Any of the challenges that face us give our lives immense purpose and immense meaning. So there's a lot more to say about purpose and about meaning in our lives, but life-driven purpose is sort of summed up in that idea. There's no purpose of life, there's purpose in life. And I think it's wonderful that our lives come to an end. The fact that they end is what makes them valuable. If life is eternal, then life is cheap. What do we do with things that are rare and precious? Their value goes up, right? Value increases with rarity. When things get more plentiful, what happens to the price? Price goes down. The value goes down. So if life it goes forever and ever and ever, then it's cheap. It's not. It's, you know, it's plentiful, and we're going to live forever or not. But the fact that our lives end someday is what actually increases the preciousness of that, and we can live our lives with more value, more meaning, more precious than sacrificing it as slaves to some master up there. So, you know, I used to be a preacher. I could talk forever. And I'm going to force myself to stop, because do we have time for questions? Or, oh, we do. We have about, what, 15 minutes or 10 minutes? Right. You're the boss. You're the master. Oh, by the way, the photographer for the front cover of Life Driven Purpose is Ingrid. Are you here somewhere? Oh, right over there. Okay. She took the picture on the front. So if you want a good picture, you can go see Ingrid Laas.
Mr. Barker,
Yeah.
I had a question about what the FFRF might be doing currently involving the In God We Trust issue. I know recently in the news, bumper stickers in the backs of cars in Missouri, but overall bigger issues which never seem to have got tackled fully, currency, things like that. Is there anything currently in the works that can be supported?
We sent out a letter, we sent out a letter to 8 or 10 sheriff and police departments around the country just last week, including one here in Missouri, right? Was that in the news? They put In God We Trust on the back of the car. Where is that? Is that close to here? Stone County? Okay. And it's not just here in Missouri, but there's all over the country. Because In God We Trust is our national motto. Did you know that? In the 1950s, it was made our national motto. So they're just saying, we're just putting our national motto on the vehicle. But we think it's wrong. We think it's unconstitutional. We tried to sue back in the early 90s about In God We Trust on the money. We were the third attempt. A guy in California tried in the 60s. Madeleine Murray O'Hair tried with American Atheists back in the 70s. We tried in the 90s. In all three cases, the same thing happened. The judge threw it out of court without getting to the merits. The judge never even took the case. So In God We Trust has never been determined on its merits yet. And can you imagine what reason the judges in each of those cases gave for disallowing us to go into court over In God We Trust on the money? It wasn't standing. Wasn't tradition. Wasn't damages. No, it wasn't public outcry. The reason we can't sue over In God We Trust is because In God We Trust is not a religious phrase. Really, that's what all the three judges said that. It's not a religious motto, right? It's just some ceremonial deism kind of thing. It's not really promoting religion. It's not religious. But I got to tell you, every time we make a complaint about state-church separation, somebody will pull out a dollar bill and say, look, we've got God on our money. Why can't we pray before city council? So this non-religious phrase, according to the courts, is being used to justify religious violations. So it's wrong. And sometimes people say, well, Dan, it's just some words on a piece of paper. It's trivial. Why do you care? It's just money. I mean, it's really nothing. It shouldn't bother you at all. And I say, well, if that's true, then it shouldn't bother you if it were removed. Right? And of course, it would bother them if it were removed. Why? Why do they care about some non-religious phrase on our money? Of course, they want a stamp. I think a lot of these religious right people are like these territorial animals. They have to mark off their boundaries, you know. This is ours, this is ours, this is ours, this is mine, right? We need the nativity scene of the state house grounds, and anyway. With the current court, there's very little chance, with the current Supreme Court, of doing anything about In God We Trust. Michael Newdow is still trying. He's a real brave champion. We admire Michael Newdow, and some people think he's going too far, but I think he's a real champion to keep pushing and pushing and pushing with the pledge and with In God We Trust. So it only happened in the 1950s. It's a Johnny-come-lately. It doesn't represent our country, and it's wrong. And every time I spend a dollar bill, I'm advertising somebody else's religion. Is that American? That I have to advertise someone else's religious views? So we're going to try to find ways to fight it. If nothing else, let's get it off the back of the patrol cars and go from there. Who's got the microphone? Oh, she's got it. I'm sorry.
Thank you for all the work you do with FRF. So it makes sense why the religious right might be against the work that your organization does. But what do you make of the sort of hit job that The Daily Show did? When you think of a more progressive show, why do you think that the left and progressives really understand that what the organization does isn't just trivial stuff? Why do you think all sides of the media try and make it out to be just a frivolous and trivial lawsuits?
Well, yeah, they're going for laughs. It's a comedy show, for one thing. And, you know, I was twice invited to The Daily Show to do a segment. One was on Mother Teresa. I don't know if you saw that one. And they tried to make us look like we were a conspiracy theory. You know, if you saw that, it was like a big Dan Brown thing. It made us look like we were complaining about nothing. Same thing happened when I went on, was it 2 years ago, last year, about this restaurant that's giving a discount for prayer. We were really certain that this time the woman giving a discount for prayer would be the butt of the joke, instead of us being the butt of the joke, right? So it was disappointing. It was silly. It was ha, ha, ha. They at least let me say a few things positive. But then when they said, what's wrong with a restaurant owner giving a discount for prayer? And I mentioned the Civil Rights Act, right? The Civil Rights Act. Any place of public accommodation is not supposed to discriminate based on race. And one of the categories is also religion. So religion falls under the Civil Rights Act. And then they turned it into, oh, you're comparing this with marching with Martin Luther King? Is that what you're comparing this prayer thing? You think this is such a big issue? I don't know if any of you saw that, but it was really out of the water. And actually, I think to the credit of most viewers, many of them were really mad with The Daily Show for not seeing that. And it was, what's the guy's name, Jason? It wasn't Jason Jones. Jordan, yeah. So, you know, he's trying to make a career and trying to make some laughs. So at least the issues were out there. And the mail and emails that we got from people were like, why don't they get that? Why didn't they get that? Well, it's comedy. It's not real news. It was a cheap laugh. If they call again, should I go back on again? I just asked Hemant. Are you here, Hemant? Hemant's probably not there. I asked Hemant, if they called you, would you do it? And he said, yep, I would do it. I'd go on. Even knowing the risk that they're going to make you the butt of the joke. No. Oh, they did a good one? Oh, they finally did a good one. Okay. Oh, great. Okay. So anyway, and so at least I get to say I was on The Daily Show, you know? Yeah?
Oh, okay, so kind of a long story how I ended up in this situation, but I was at a Catholic youth conference about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I admitted I was atheist, and they knew I had just become atheist because just that previous school year, I was volunteering with a youth group and helping and, giving my testimony and stuff like that. And they would give a lot of arguments against me and like say a lot of things and trying to pull me to their side. And one of the things they said was, well, maybe you didn't love God in the first place if you're atheist now. And I'm thinking, I wanted to be a nun. I wanted to give my life to Christ. So, okay, I'm assuming I'm allowed to curse here, right? No one's offended by cursing now. Fuck that. I totally love God, or the idea of God. I just don't believe in him anymore because I don't think he exists. And I didn't know how to like tell them that politely, I guess. Like I didn't know how to explain.
Yeah.
It's not that I didn't love God, it's just that my beliefs changed.
Yeah.
How would you personally, like, if someone came up to you and said maybe you just didn't love God because you were a former pastor, how would you have responded?
Well, one thing, and there's probably a dozen ways to respond, but you could say something like, I did truly love Santa Claus. It was really hard to give up, but I grew up, right? So you could say something like that. It depends on the relationship, but some of us in this audience really did love God, you know what I mean? Putting God in the word quotes, in quotes. We believed it, we felt it, and even today I can go back in that mode, and I won't do it now, but I could go back in that mode of speaking in tongues and I can get all the goosebumps and the feeling, and it feels like there's this presence in my mind. And some of you don't know what the heck I'm talking about, right? But some of you do, right? Some of you know there's a religious experience that happens to some of us. And it's probably a variation in the species that some of us tend to be a little more, what's the word, mystical maybe or something? I was just about a ½ inch this side of hearing voices, if you know what I mean. Just, that's me, and you're not like me, or maybe you are. So we're all going to go to church, and we're all going to have a slightly different take on what's happening in that worship service. So it looks like you were a true believer, and you believed it and loved it and wanted it, and then you intellectually changed your mind. So it's the intellectual questions that were important to me. That's why I left. And then later, the moral questions and the emotional and even the social questions and political questions came later. For me, the most important question was, is it true? Regardless of the fallout, is it true or not? And I think you would probably say the same thing. You loved it and you believed it, but you realized it's just not true. Well, we can talk later then.
Dan, it takes an awful lot to get me upset. And just my training as a mediator and arbitrator, I can talk to people for a long time, and they can say all kinds of ridiculous things, or post things, or write things, or what have you. But something did get me upset, and I expected more from this particular program. It was on ABC, What Would You Do? And it's a program that I watch all the time. And I don't know if you saw the show. Oh, well, I would just hope that for those of you who have seen the show and how it misrepresented how an atheist would act, it just got to me. I sent my letters to ABC, and what it was, since you don't know.
Yeah, I read about it. I didn't see it, though.
Oh,
No.
okay, so you know about it.
Yeah, it's all over the internet, but I never saw the show.
Well, I would hope a lot of people would respond to ABC, because it was a terrible misrepresentation of an atheist in a restaurant. And I just could not get over it.
Except, there probably are 3 atheists like that in the world, So we had a convention in Madison one year, and most of them are dressed nice like you, but we had one member who was this really nice guy, but he was a motorcycle driver who who came in with his long hair flowing and his face was sunburned. He looked like Charlie Manson. He was a really nice guy, wonderful guy. He sat in the front row. So the evening news focused on him. And the evening news was, the atheists are in town. And then they've got his picture. You know, it's like they're looking for what they think we're supposed to be like instead of actually asking us, what are we really like in our real lives, you know? Yeah, that's kind of unsettling.
Yes, I wonder if you could touch a little bit on the Clergy Project and your involvement in that, and also specifically talk about the requirements as far as how somebody qualifies for that. For example, if you have an organization that doesn't allow women ministers, but there may be women who essentially function as such, or perhaps are Christian as teachers who are secretly atheists. Those types of situations, would they qualify for the Clergy Project?
Yeah, the Clergy Project is for clergy, whatever that word means. And it can be kind of fuzzy how to define that word. It's mostly ministers and priests and rabbis and we have some nuns in the group, and some seminarians who were doing ministerial work that got out early, that kind of a thing. They're actually doing ministry and clergy work. It doesn't include Sunday school teachers and lay workers and that kind of thing, although a lot of them do a lot of ministry. And it might include a church choir director if it's an ordained minister that's their ministry, is music ministry. So we have some of those. We have a screening committee that very carefully screens each person who wants to join. And sometimes it's a judgment call. Sometimes the minister's wife is just as much a minister as the minister himself, because a lot of churches will hire the couple. And so the ministers are an ordained minister, but the wife is doing an awful lot of the ministry and the work. So I think there are a couple of ministers' wives that are in the group as well who are now atheists. About 1/4 of the group are still active. They're still preaching and ministering in some way. There's about 650 in the group now, so what is that? More than 100, so 150 people. So, we use pseudonyms, and we tell them to use a pseudonym. And in the Clergy Project, only 1 or 2 people knows who the person actually is because of privacy. And within the project itself, which is a secret online forum, they use their pseudonym name and they talk to each other. And we encourage them, don't give away too much about yourself. Because what if somebody did sneak in and wanted to ruin somebody's life? It could really be devastating. So this Clergy Project, it's a bit of a long story. It's kind of like, if I was a believer, I'd say it was an act of God that brought it together. You know, when I left the ministry, I found other former clergy. In fact, we had a meeting in 1985 in Minneapolis of some former clergy. And we had a panel talking about what it was like. So it goes way back. There are people who have left the ministry. But, and so I have a whole lot of friends and people that I've known and people who are still, and I get emails from people who read my book. So in 2010, Daniel Dennett, the philosopher, and his colleague Linda Lascola did a study about preachers who don't believe, which was in evolutionary psychology. You may have seen that study. They've since done a part 2, which is now a book called Caught in the Pulpit. And when they were doing their study, they realized, how do you find a minister who's in the pulpit who doesn't believe? How do you advertise for something? How do you find some? Because they're going to keep their mouth shut, right? So Linda found a few, and then she called me, and I've had a few people that call. I got secret phone calls from people. Don't tell anybody who I am, but I'm a preacher in southern Tennessee, and boy, if my congregation knew I was an atheist, boy. So Linda and Dan took a few of those and included those people in their initial study. Richard Dawkins has long time talked about. We were in Iceland maybe 10 years ago, and Richard Dawkins says, you know, there's a lot of clergy who don't believe. We need to help them. And he had the idea, let's start something called Save a Preacher, you know, which is a cute idea. Maybe we'll use that on the brochure. And then we were in Copenhagen a few years later, and Richard Dawkins again went out of his way to say, what can we do? Can we help these? Can we raise some money to help these clergy that are trapped to get out of the ministry? So in January of 2011, Linda Lascola and Richard Dawkins' director, Elizabeth Cornwell, and we met at the American Indian Museum in Washington, D.C. for lunch, and we decided, let's form a group. We didn't have a name for it. We decided to start it. Richard Dawkins Foundation put up all the money. It was a lot of money to start this whole project and the webpage. And then a bunch of the clergy members themselves, including 2 active clergy who were still preaching, who were like our admins for a while. It was pretty exciting to see this work. And one guy, his nickname was Adam, the Tennessee preacher. He would preach his Easter morning sermon, and then he'd close his office door and email us. You won't believe the crap I had to say today from... I can't wait to get out of here. I need a new job. And it took him about 2 years. And during that time, he was secretly helping us build the Clergy Project. It's pretty exciting. And so we've raised some money. The Todd Stiefel Foundation made a huge grant to help with transitional job training. So if they need to find new training out of the ministry into some other career. And we've given out probably, well, I don't know, maybe 20 of those grants already to people to help them get retrained. And then we have a small amount of money for hardship grants if they need help right now to get out of town or something. We helped Jerry DeWitt, for example. He was going to lose his car and his house and everything. So we kind of passed the hat. You know, he was a well-respected member of his community. You know, he was a minister of a well-known church, and then he became an atheist, and he was dumped on the streets. He couldn't find a job. So it was that kind of a thing that happens. So in 2011, we started in March with 52 members. We call them the founding 50, kind of like the founding fleet in Australia. And then it's about 650 now. And it's kind of nice because it's a new organization that you don't have to join. So you can support it if you like, but the only members of the group are clergy, including there was an actual monk. Sergei was his nickname. He was actually thrown out of the monastery by the abbot when they found out he didn't believe in God. He said, you're either, the abbot said to Sergei, well, you don't believe in God? Well, it's simple. It's either one of two things. You're either mentally ill or you're demon possessed. And they forced him. I don't know how they forced him. They took him out in handcuffs because he was on medication, I think, for depression. They took him out in handcuffs for forced psychiatric evaluation. And all they found was excessive earwax, he said. And he went back to the monastery. They wouldn't let him back in. He couldn't get his clothes, his books, his laptop. We interviewed him on Free Thought Radio. He was sitting on a park bench outside of a homeless shelter. He didn't have anything and he called the homeless shelter Bugs and Thugs because of the way the people that were there. But it was sad. And he was just thrown out because of it. So we're trying to help some of those people. And a lot of it is emotional help. What books did you read? How did your family react? What happened to your marriage? Where can I find a good secular marriage counselor? Where can I, that kind of stuff. We're trying to be practical with the Clergy Project.
All right. Thanks, Dan Barker.